We're back again with another video, again on the 2014 Honda Accord. You guys have seen us recently replace all the suspension components. We did tie rods, ball joints, lower control arms, all of that. So you guys saw us do that, but now in this video today, we are going to do these brake calipers. Nothing too crazy. We're not going to go nuts where we completely tear them apart. But I did notice that the seal on the pistons was cracked due to obviously excessive heat, because I tracked this, and when you track it, you definitely are going to have very excessive heat. And so the actual seal, or the rubber seal, or the rubber ring, or whatever you want to call it, on the outside, you can see that it's cracked, which is almost certainly allowing debris to get into where the piston is. So what we're going to do is we're going to replace that seal, but we're also going to pop the pistons out and replace the seals, the inner seal that's on the piston.
Just like anything, we start with the removal process. We remove the brake line away from the caliper, and then we also remove the caliper bolts from the knuckle to remove the caliper and take it off. Before we go ahead and start working on the caliper, I do end up plugging the caliper line to make sure all the brake fluid doesn't leak out. We specifically use the 3/8 tapered plug that comes in this kit. Now that the line is plugged, we go ahead and focus on the caliper. We start out with removing the hardware to hold the pads to the caliper, and then we work on removing the pistons from the caliper itself. This is where it gets a little tricky. We are going to use compressed air to force the pistons to come out. However, even with a little bit of air, as we found out while working on this, will cause those pistons to just fly out, even the slightest pressure. We tried a few different methods to prevent them from just slamming into each other, which was putting rags in between to help soften the blow. Also, some of them didn't fully come out, so we did have to use a set of pliers to help get them out by rotating them while clamping down on them.
So when I ordered these were fully rebuilt, and supposedly this is high temp gaskets. Well, these are pretty damn welded into the caliper for being high temp. That's all I'm saying. But supposedly these are top notch. Honestly, I think it's just the same kit that I have here, which is not. This is just a basic kit. This is not top notch.
Once those pistons were removed, we focused on removing those damaged outer seal rings, which was a little bit of a pain to fully get out, but we ended up using a very small screwdriver and a pick to try to get them off without actually damaging the surface they sit on. After the outer seals were removed, then we focused on removing the inner seals. However, this is where we figured out, or at least assumed, that this was not the smart move, and we should have left those seals in while we were going to clean the inside tubes a little bit with the debris that was there. This way the seal could prevent anything from getting into where it's seated. But it is what it is. We made sure we did it that way. On the other side, to clean those tubes, passageways, or whatever you want to call them, we just used a very soft Scotch-Brite and almost like one of those home eraser cleaners to help clean the surface. It wasn't pitted or grooved by any means, but we wanted to make sure that it was as clean as possible that we could get it before putting in the new seals and the pistons back in. This was a pain to try to clean because we couldn't get the caliper fully separated. It was annoying to try to get into those passageways to get that as smooth as possible. Once we were done with that, we focused on the pistons themselves. They had a little bit of damage on them. The damage does look like it was there from previous installation before we started messing with them, but we can't say for sure. To clean up the damage so it doesn't ruin the new outer seal, we just used a pneumatic die grinder with a soft pad. This helped clean up the face of it and also those slight harsh damaged areas. Then we installed the new inner seals. Of course, we made sure we lubed up the seals before installing them. And then we put the outer seals on the pistons, which was a little bit of a nuisance, more than expected, and then installed the pistons into the calipers. Now, we did lube up the pistons before installing them in, so that way they just slid in a lot easier without destroying that inner seal. The only thing I will say is that another thing that we noticed after doing this project was we thought maybe those outer seals, as you can see here, we're using a plier to seat them better around the ring they sit on. What we thought instead was before actually pushing in the pistons, we would expand that seal to get it to sit better on that ring before compressing the piston. We thought of that again after the fact, so not sure if that would be the smarter plan, but it's possible. For lubing, we just used .4 brake fluid that we had lying around. New fluid, of course, not used. This way, again, it helped the piston go in without fully damaging this inner seal. And then, of course, before pressing in that piston, we made sure it was as lined up as possible so it was going in straight and not crooked. As for pressing the pistons in, we simply just used a C-clamp to get that done. We made sure to use soft material on the outside to not damage the caliper, and then just slowly press the pistons in while paying attention on how they were going in, so they weren't going in crooked versus straight, of course. Before putting in the new pads, I made sure that I cleaned up the hardware that holds them in. I did not buy new hardware, that was my mistake, but it's fine. These were only on there with one set of pads. I just made sure I cleaned it up with brake clean and a wire wheel, and then also looped them up when putting them in. Overall, they came out pretty clean and will work for now. Next time around when replacing pads, I'll probably get new ones. When installing the new pads, I made sure I lubed the back of the pads and also the outer edges to help with noise, and then of course with the functionality of them sliding in the caliper. I will have to say that installing brake pads on calipers like these is a lot easier to do it on the car than it is off the car, which is usually not the case. Usually it's the other way around, but I have, in my experience, have noticed after doing this that it definitely seems like it's easier to do it on the car with having the rotor in there to help separate the pads while you're getting them installed. Of course, I made sure to be very careful so I didn't get any kind of grease on the front part of the pad that's going to be the braking part, which is the one that's going to be touching the rotor. However, I have noticed for me personally this is difficult to do when dealing with grease, but this time around I was able to do it without having the need to clean the face of the pads due to any of my own mistakes. Once the pads and hardware were installed, it was time to put the caliper back on the car, and of course installation is just reversal of the removal. We got the new rotor already on there. We did put anti-seize on the hub itself. This is, of course, if you watched the last video, is a new hub, and we do also anti-seize the bolts. Some people will say that the anti-seize on the bolts and on the hub is bad. For the hub, they'll say that it can get on the face of the rotor, which then obviously will ruin your braking performance and possibly cause a dangerous scenario. And for the bolts, it can cause them to not stay tight and lose them. I haven't experienced either, so I will continue to do it, but I'm not saying it's right. As for tightening the caliper bolts to the knuckle, it is supposed to be 80 foot-pounds, but we use the good and tight method to get that tightened up. Again, I'm an idiot, so I do things the wrong way. I will say though, this method has never failed me, so for now I'll continue to do it until it does. After the caliper was secure, we installed the brake line with new copper washers, and of course that also was the good and tight method, but it is supposed to be 26 foot-pounds. As for the rotors, this is what the old ones looked like after 1 or maybe 2 track days, along with an autocross event and obviously daily driving. And then here's the pads. As you can see, very much ended up getting destroyed. For the new rotors, we ended up going with the same ones that were already on there, obviously just new ones, which were Stop Techs. And then for the pads, I used DFC pads this time around for their low metallic daily driving ones. And then if I do end up going back on track, I will switch over to different pads. Now that the first side is done, we of course repeat the same process on the passenger side.
I'm just worried about it getting on the rotor. Yeah.
Have a running one. It's not great. All right, next video is going to be the rear control arms and the hub, which has the bearing attached to it.